he's working on one of his patients who had been doing a stress test and had a heart attack. And he gets his heart going again, and the patient screams, "I'm in hell, help me. And then he codes again. And then Rawlings gets him back a second time. He's screaming, "I'm in hell, do something. Don't let me go back there." He codes again. And the guy comes back in for his checkup, and Rawlings was going to grill him. And he's like, "Okay, you got to tell me, what were you experiencing? Why did you keep saying I was in hell?" And the guy said, "What are you talking about?"
My special guest today is New York Times bestselling author John Burke, and we're going to be talking about his 10-year journey with the book Imagine Heaven, kind of focusing some of it on his background, the adventures he's had along the way, and what God has shown him in the process. John, it's always good to see you, my friend. Welcome back to the show.
Good to see you, Shaun. Thanks for having me on.
But for the person who maybe they're new to NDEs or they've not even heard about Imagine Heaven, just give us a little bit of context for you in that book.
I was an agnostic. My dad was dying of cancer. Someone gave him the first research that coined the term near-death experience. And I read it in one night and said, "Oh my gosh, maybe this is the evidence that I've been looking for." And I was an engineer by background, trained that way, worked in engineering. And so I needed some evidence. And I thought, well, maybe this is really pointing to the truth of it. And so many of them were encountering this God of light and love in their near-death experience. And by the way, this is, your audience probably knows, but a near-death experience is when people clinically die, or those are the ones I focus on. They have no heartbeat, no brain waves, and yet they say they are more alive than they've ever felt, in a place more real than this has ever been. And many are talking about experiencing this God of light who is love. Many of them talk about Jesus, seeing Jesus. And so I read this and I was like, I need to be more open to the Bible. And so I got into a small group Bible study that next year, and that's how I came to faith in Jesus. End up going from engineering into ministry. My wife and I started a church for skeptics like me. Turns out there are a lot of us. So we reached thousands of people who came to faith, and that's what we did for 25 years. But in 2015, and I wrote 3 books before that about really how to bridge to the secular culture, how to help people far from God find faith. But then in 2015, I had studied probably 1,000 near-death experiences by then. And again, this is like that was like a 35-year journey. So now it's been, 40, 45 years of curiosity and trying to figure out what are these near-death experiences and how do they relate to the Bible. And I actually did my first talk on this at the University of California, Santa Barbara in 1989. So I've been curious about it for a long time. But in 2015, I finally wrote Imagine Heaven, which I felt like I had found enough of the interpretive keys that I call them, these keys to answering the things that were confusing me about how those two fit together, the Bible and NDEs. And so I wrote that about 40 commonalities that people talk about in their near-death experience and how all of them are found in Scripture. And that's kind of what I was showing, is this incredible journey into the afterlife, that it's really biblical, but here's a very vivid picture, as you hear from these 120 people I quote.
I had interviewed Dr. Moody about his book, Proof of Life After Life, which came out a few years ago. But ultimately, one of the conclusions he reaches in that book is the only way you can give people kind of definite, concrete assurance that NDEs are real isn't any of the research anybody's been involved in for the last 50 years in that group. It's these third-party verifiable things, like the things that they see during their out-of-body experience, that can be verified with the people who are in the waiting room, in the surgical suite, wherever. That's just struck me as profound, that after all his years working in this, that's the concrete thing he says, that's the next space of further research.
I think there's more. But I mean, what about blind people? I've now interviewed 7 people blind from birth, and they're blind when they come back, but they're reporting visual things consistently. Now, I mean, if you have 7 eyewitnesses in a court of law and they all say exactly the same thing, that's collusion. But if you have people who are saying basically the same things from a different angle or perspective, well, that's strong evidence. And, when you have blind people saying the same things that sighted people do about the light of heaven coming out of everything and its love and life, and that's what the scripture says, but most Christians wouldn't think that. Most Christians don't put together that the glory of God that John said is the light of heaven. That's Revelation 21. The glory of God is the light of heaven, and the nations will walk in that light. And that's pretty subtle, right? But God is love, and Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. So the very fact that you have all these people testifying that the light of heaven is light and love and life, that's amazing evidence. How do you explain? I interviewed 70 people from every continent and every religious background, and they are testifying about the same God. Same God, same characteristics. And when they come back seeking him, they find the God of Jesus. How do you explain that?
Let's jump back a little bit more. What was happening with NDEs in the 70s?
Dr. Moody actually first heard about these from Dr. George Ritchie. There are all these medical doctors. So Dr. George Ritchie, I actually write about him. He's my first story in Imagine Heaven. He was actually in the Army in 1945 during World War II. And he had a near-death experience when he died of double pneumonia. Experiences Jesus. Jesus takes him on a tour of both hell and heaven, and he comes back and he became a doctor. He was actually the precursor founder to the Peace Corps as well. Dr. Ritchie was, but he was at the University of Virginia where Dr. Moody was, and he told his story to faculty one day, and Dr. Moody heard it and was curious because Dr. Moody was teaching classes on philosophy, and he decided to teach a class on the theory of postmortem survival. And when he started teaching the class, every class he would have 1 or 2 or 3 students come up and go, this happened to me. And then they would describe a near-death experience. And he kept doing this until he had about 60 or 70 of them. And that's how he published his book. And then there was this kind of cascade effect of doctors. So Dr. Sabom was actually a cardiologist who read Dr. Moody's book and said, that's not true. I've resuscitated tons of patients. People don't come back from the dead. And then he starts asking his patients after they have cardiac arrests, did you experience anything? So he starts asking very open questions. And then he starts hearing. And he told me he set out to disprove near-death experiences. He was a Christian and he wanted to disprove them. And after 5 years of research, he actually published an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association showing that this is actual evidence that the soul survives the body. He actually went on to write a book as well. And so then you have Dr. Jeff Long, an oncologist, reads the article in JAMA and says, that's not true. And he starts asking patients, and they start telling him, well, he ends up starting NDERF, which is now the largest database of global accounts of near-death experiences. At the same time, you have Dr. Pim van Lommel in Holland, who is also a cardiologist, has a similar case, and starts to experience more and more of them, writes up an article in The Lancet, which is Europe's most prestigious medical journal. So there's this kind of explosion of interest taking place really in the 80s. Now, interestingly, though, what also happened during that time is people were starting to make interpretations of what these are and what they mean. And as a result, many Christian leaders rejected this whole near-death experience idea. So it was doctors originally that were finding this evidence and starting to compile it and all that. And they were more interested in a medical perspective. That's what IANDS really formed around initially. Yeah. But Christian leaders started to reject it. And that actually caused a lot of problem.
Well, and like I've always found Ritchie's story fascinating in the sense that was, and it may have been just the limitation of stories that were going around at that time about NDEs, but like if you look at almost all of the core like founders of IANDS and a range of the like authors who've been working in this space for in like 30 to 40 years, Ritchie almost always comes up in the first chapter of their book as a core, story, testimony, if you will, that caught their attention and kind of led them down the rabbit hole. So again, I love that he comes up. His book is phenomenal. Published by Chosen Books, who I used to work for. I don't remember the title off the top of my.
Return from Tomorrow.
Yes, Return from Tomorrow. If you haven't read it, it's an exceptional read. Any conversations in the secular world around NDEs at that time? Anything significant?
And one of the things that convinced me there's something real to it, and this is what was coming out in the medical observations, were the verifiable observations people were making. That, they could, when they were out of their bodies, they could report what was actually happening in the room of their resuscitation. And so, that started me realizing, okay, well, this is not just brain-based. At the same time, I think the reason Christians were rejecting it is there were almost no accounts of hellish near-death experiences. And so the narrative that started to be told during this time is it's all good. There's no judgment. In fact, you judge yourself and everybody goes to heaven. Or the life to come is good for all. And part of it, Shaun, and this was part of the struggle I had too, is people would report, okay, I was in the presence of God, this God of light who was love, loved me unconditionally, and I got a life review. And the life review, because time works differently on the other side, it's like reliving your life, right? From a third perspective, also you remember every thought and feeling with every interaction with every person, but God is also giving them the understanding of what those people they interacted with were thinking and feeling, and how our kindness or our meanness affected others and even rippled through humanity. So they're saying all this, and we know that today is true of these stories, but the interpretation was God was not judging me. God was just loving me. God is just unconditional love. And God was supporting me. I was judging myself. I saw clearly the rights and the wrongs, and I was my own worst judge. Okay. Now, what confused people is, so then they would say, like, the Bible's version of a God who there's going to be a judgment and he holds us accountable for our rights and our wrongs. That's not what they see. There is no hellish torment or anything like that. It's all good. And we just judge ourselves. So stop it. Just stop judging yourself. And then even rolled to good is bad and bad is good. It's all just learning. So it got, it got skewed. And I think it's important for your audience to realize that, that's always the way evil works. It takes something good that God has given and then turns it so that it's 90% true, but it's aimed away from God. So I think that's what was happening really in the late 80s, early 90s. And what I started to realize are these interpretive keys. That came a little later, though, so I'll come back to that. But there was confusion, And so you have these near-death experiencers who go to their pastor or their priest, and they're like, I had this incredible encounter with God. I left my body and I went through the walls of the hospital and I saw this and that. And they're like, whoa, 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 wait a second. What's that? We don't do that. And because there was mystery to it, and there were confusing ways they might explain it, many Christian pastors just said, that's satanic, stay away from it. Well, these people, as you now know, because you've interviewed so many of them as well, this is the most sacred, real thing, more real than this. And so what happened, unfortunately, I think evil used it against them and said, well, then the Christian faith is wrong because you know this is real. And so then there became a whole group that felt outcast from the Christian church who came together and started to reinterpret what all this meant. And so, that caused a lot of confusion, but there were other things. So the 90s then, kind of moving into the 90s, the Gallup poll had done a survey and found that 1 out of 25 Americans had had a near-death experience. So now it's like, okay, wait a second. Like there are millions of people that are having these experiences. And for me, I was like, well, we got to make sense of this because at the end of the day, I'm a thinker and I'm an apologist. I want to know, okay, well, how do you help people put the pieces together? Because when I was an agnostic, that was my problem is I had a lot of questions and I couldn't find Christians who would spend the time helping me find answers. So I just declared it all myth, So I think that's part of why, I've been interested in that. Dr. Rawlings was a cardiologist who writes a book about his experience. So do you know about this one, Dr. Rawlings?
No, I've somehow missed Dr. Rawlings. I'm curious.
Oh man. Yeah. So he was an interpretive key for me. One of the ones he was, and then Howard Storm. So he's in the 80s, late 80s. He's working on one of his patients who had been doing a stress test and had a heart attack. And he gets his heart going again, and the patient screams, I'm in hell, help me. And then he codes again. And then Rawlings gets him back a second time. He's screaming, I'm in hell, do something. Don't let me go back there. He codes again. Third time, he's just terrified. And now Rawlings is shaken up because he grew up in going to church, but he was a materialist, atheist doctor. And he's like, what is going on? But he's thinking, I got to get the stent in this guy or he is going to hell or wherever. And the guy said the third time, you got to do something. Pray for me. And Rawlings said, I'm not a pastor. I'm not going to pray for you. I got to get this stent in you. And he kept begging him. So just to shut the guy up so he could get the stent in him, Rawlings just goes back to his Sunday school experience and just says, all right, say this. Jesus, forgive me of my sins. If you do, I'm on the hook for you forever. And the guy says it, and then he codes again, and then he comes back, but he's not screaming anymore. He has this incredibly peaceful look on him. Okay, well, this shakes Rawlings up. And the whole next week, he is so troubled by this. He even breaks out his Bible and starts reading, like, is this stuff in there? And the guy comes back in for his checkup, and Rawlings was going to grill him. And he's like, okay, you got to tell me, what were you experiencing? Why did you keep saying I was in hell? And the guy said, what are you talking about? He said, the only thing I remember was, and it was after that third time, I was in this lush garden-like valley and mountain valley full of light. And I met my birth mother who had died when I was just an infant. She had died giving birth to me, and I met her there. And it was the most incredible heavenly experience. So that totally changed Rawlings, and he actually came to faith in Jesus because of that guy's testimony. And what he And then he ended up writing a book, and he studied a lot of them as well, and concluded that there are hellish experiences. Some of them, though, block it out because it's like a PTSD encounter. And I think in Imagine Heaven, I even quote other cardiologists who experience the same thing. And so for me, that was like oh, okay. So maybe part of why, I mean, on the one hand, Dr. Pim van Lommel said there are hellish experiences. He's the Dutch cardiologist. But they are so terrifying and they're so shaming and so real, people don't report them. They're underreported. But many did. And so there was a study done actually from IANDS, I think in the 90s, that showed that 23% of near-death experiencers who came forward actually reported hellish experiences. So you're getting this confluence of things that really fit the biblical narrative and then things that are really confusing about it. Another report during the 90s that I remember studying was, it was a fascinating one. They were psychologists from Sweden who were studying near-death experiences and basically trying to show that these are not culturally adjusted. So they studied 500 Indians, with a Hindu background, and 500 Americans with a mostly Christian background, and that had near-death experiences, and they show the consistencies. And what they found is that the Hindus they didn't talk about the Vedic loci of the Hindu heaven. They didn't talk about dissolution of the self into, the Brahman or any of that. He said they might have referred to karma in that many of them saw a man with a beard in a robe who it was often thought to be divine holding a book of accounts. Well, that's more like an angel or Jesus with the book of life or their life review, right? But then they also, so they said, so this is not a Hindu experience. But then they also said, but it's also not a Christian experience because these Americans experience this God of love who is not punishing or judgmental. They judge themselves, not the other way around. And and so that's what they were trying to show, that it's not Christian and it's not Hindu. Now that led me to kind of dive in, and what I realized is it's a misunderstanding. So judgment does not come until the end of human history. The judgment in Revelation 20, the great white throne, which is all about whose name is in the book of life, whose heart is given to God and has accepted what Jesus did. The other judgment is the Bema seat, which is a reward ceremony. It's like the judges stand at the Olympics where they give you an award. And neither of those happen until all of human history is consummated. So a life review is neither one. And I think instead, what I started to realize is it's just what Jesus said when he said, there's nothing hidden that will not be revealed. And, Paul said, judge nothing until the appointed time and until Jesus comes, and he will reveal the motives of the heart and reward everyone for the deeds done. And so I think that's what the life review is. And the reason people say, I was judging myself is, one, God is love, so he can't do anything but love us. That is his very nature. Even if we do wrong, he still loves us. Doesn't remove his love. But the second part is Jesus even said in Matthew 12 to the Pharisees, he said, by your own words will you be acquitted, by your own words will you be condemned. And I think he's pointing to this very fact that, when we see our life review, we will see the truth. Like we can rationalize things here. We can, say, well, yeah, but there they don't. It's like, no, they know. And so then they know either that, yes, I recognize my need for forgiveness and Jesus covered that for me. Thank you. Or I didn't need that. I'm good. And by their own words, that was the decision they made. So that was kind of now in the 90s, all this is swirling, but I'm also busy. I have a young family. My wife and I had 2 young kids. I went to seminary. We started a church in 1997. So I kind of, I'm still dabbling in it, not because I want to become an expert in it. I'm just insanely curious, which, Shaun, I think now the only thing that explains it is God was painting my story before I knew what my story was,
Yeah, he was getting you ready for one of your major life assignments.
And I have never once heard an NDE of the 1,500 or so that I've studied say that they were given the option of going on to heaven, going back to earth in their body, or trying a different body. Not once. In the early 2000s, then, Don Piper, who is a pastor, then has a near-death experience. He writes about it. He starts speaking publicly. So then that, in some churches, begins to change minds. Like, oh, there is a Christian tie to this. I also, I started, Howard Storm, and he was an interpretive key for me. So I started to realize that one of the problems with many of these, what they're saying is that they interpret something in their own worldview, but what is commonly reported really does align with Scripture. So, for instance, I started to notice that those who had what I'd call a shallow near-death experience, and I don't mean shallow like it wasn't meaningful or real, but if they're like, I've traced 40 common elements. So like, you leave your body, you notice things around you, you feel great. You have like 50 senses, not just 5, and then you come back to your body. Well, that you could interpret in a million different ways from every possible worldview, and people do. So many, were doing just that. But it didn't correlate with the consistent reports that were coming out that were common, right? And that's what I was trying to show finally. That's what I started to see. So like Howard Storm, is this atheist professor who has a near-death experience. Initially, he's standing there by his bed and he just felt the worst he'd ever felt in his life. And now he feels great. He said, I felt like Superman. And I asked, did you know you were dead? And he's like, no, I'd never felt so alive. These nice people are in the hallway of the hospital saying, Howard, we're here for you. And he's like, I need surgery. I've been waiting all day. And they're like, oh, we know all about you, and you probably know the story. Well, what I realized is if Howard had been resuscitated right then, the interpretation would have been, it's all good, atheist. It doesn't matter what you believe, doesn't matter what you do, because he had done some pretty bad things, morally and ethically, and wasn't great with the students. And he admits all that. But he would have said, oh, there were these nice people. I had this nice welcoming committee. I felt wonderful. It's all good. But they led him to the outer darkness and deceived him, and it turned into a hellish experience. So that was an interpretive key for me, because I realized that not everything that starts good ends good in a near-death experience. So that was really critical. The other thing was realizing that 30% report, and I was just starting to put the pieces together, that they come to a border or a boundary. And I started to realize it's represented by different things, but it's very clear they know I can't cross over and still come back to earth. And so I started to realize, well, whatever these near-death experiences are, it's not what it says in Hebrews 9:27, because that always tripped me up. It's appointed for mankind to die once and then judgment. And so I was always like, well, then what is this? What I realized, it's not death. It's not full biological death. It's not crossing into either eternal life or eternal death. It's a liminal space in between where God is letting us see the reality of all of it. And so, those Dr. Neal, Dale Black, Colton Burpo, they all start to come out. So what happened with Don Piper? He's a hero to me because he was brave enough to go on the road talking about this as a pastor. That allowed Christians to come out of the closet, literally. Right? They were like, I'm not telling anyone this. I'll be shunned at my church. I'll be called satanic or evil. They start talking. They start telling. And so that helped me start to put more and more pieces together. And it really answered a lot of questions. And so for me, that it was like the 2010s that really accelerated my research. I remember the day I'm walking through the garage and I asked the Lord, am I supposed to write about this weirdo near-death experience stuff I've been so confused about and enamored with? Because I was starting to get the pieces. And I very clearly heard in my thoughts, not yet. And I know why, because honestly, he's doing something and it wasn't time yet. I think if I had written then, I would have been rejected by mainstream Christianity. But there was enough that then came out and enough that happened that, then in 2015, when I wrote Imagine Heaven, right before I pushed send, I said to the Lord, well, here goes my ministry. It's probably going to end it. And I said, but I know you called me to do it, so here goes. And right before I push, I'm not kidding, I heard in my thoughts, and I think it was the Lord, I've opened a door in heaven no one can close. And I was like, okay, did I just make that up? Did I just think that? But I'll tell you what, Shaun, I mean, you know what books do. Books go up and they come down and then they plateau. They don't go up and then just keep going up. That doesn't happen. And that's what's happened with Imagine Heaven. And it's been translated into 30 languages. We hear of people all over the globe coming to faith through it every week. And so I have no doubt that that's what he's doing now. He's raising up these global testimonies really to call his children home from every nation.
Absolutely. I like to say that each one of these testimonies is a love letter from the Father calling us unto himself.
When we started our church, we started the church to reach people. We started the church to reach people who were far from God. And what I'm seeing now is that he called me to leave that because he's reaching people from all nations far from God. And, I dragged my feet starting my Imagine Heaven podcast. He told me, I was in India in 2021 in the most remote village imaginable. We built a hospital there among the poorest of the poor. And I was even in a further, more remote village, and everyone had a smartphone. And the Holy Spirit whispered, my message, the gospel, can go anywhere. And I had the thought, I've got all these videos of interviews I've done. Nobody's seen them. I just used them to write books. And I knew he wanted me to start a YouTube podcast channel. And so I immediately dragged my feet for 2 more years. 3 more years. Yeah, because I've been on the every week crank out a message, for 27 years. And I was like, I don't know. But Shaun, the reason I tell you that is because in 1 year, it's gone to 100 nations. And we've seen millions of hours watched in 100 nations. Only God. I mean, I didn't do that.
John, for people who want to connect with you, check out the podcast, check out your various books, just keep up with what you're doing. Where are the best places for us to find you on the web?
Yeah. So Imagine Heaven and Imagine the God of Heaven are pretty much anywhere books are sold. The podcast is the Imagine Heaven podcast with John Burke.